The notification popped up on my personal phone, a terse calendar alert, dentist, 10 a.m. It was a Tuesday, October 26, 2023, my scheduled day off, a small mercy I'd granted myself after closing out the grueling Q3 financials for Innovate Solutions Incorporated. I was stirring my coffee, the morning sun still a pale wash over the city skyline visible from my apartment window. The mundane nature of the reminder, the sheer domesticity of it, was a stark contrast to the email that had landed in my personal inbox just moments before, an email I initially mistook for spam. The subject line was brutally efficient regarding your employment status. It was from Richard Davies, VP of Operations, my boss for the last 8 years. My stomach, still warm from the first sips of coffee, turned cold. They fired me. On my day off. Without a phone call, without a single word of warning after 18 years of service. The email, dated that very morning at 8:03 a.m., was a masterpiece of corporate detachment, citing a strategic realignment and the elimination of your current role. My role? Senior Project Manager. The role I had not only filled but shaped, built from the ground up, nurturing projects from trembling ideas to multi-million-dollar realities. The irony, the beautiful, savage irony that twisted in my gut like a dull knife, was that for the past 6 months I'd been meticulously, almost religiously, copying every critical file, every line of proprietary code I'd developed, every client communication log, every process document I'd authored. Not out of malice, not initially. It began as a nagging unease, a quiet voice whispering that the ground beneath my feet, once so solid, was beginning to shift. So I backed it all up to a secure, encrypted drive tucked away in my home safe. Everything they would need to navigate the complex labyrinth of projects I managed, the very projects Richard and the executive team touted in shareholder meetings, was now sitting on my desk in my apartment while my access to their servers was, I had no doubt, already severed. They thought they were cutting dead weight. They had no idea they'd just amputated their own right arm, and I was the only one holding the tourniquet. My relationship with Innovate Solutions Incorporated, or ISI as we called it, hadn't begun with the expectation of betrayal. Quite the opposite. I joined them in the spring of 2005, a fresh-faced 34-year-old, eager and ambitious. The company was smaller than, a plucky underdog in the burgeoning tech services industry. My first office was a cubicle so compact I could touch 3 walls without fully extending my arms, but it felt like a palace. I was employee number 37. I remembered Richard Davies when he was just a senior manager in a different department, equally ambitious, though perhaps a bit more overtly political in his maneuvering. We were comrades, in a way, part of the initial cohort that truly believed in ISI's vision, innovative solutions for a dynamic world. Cheesy, perhaps, but we bought into it. For nearly 2 decades, I poured my life into that company. My role evolved from a junior project coordinator to senior project manager, overseeing some of our most complex and lucrative accounts. The Keystone Project, a multi-year contract with a national logistics firm, was my baby. I'd personally developed the core architecture for its management software, a system so efficient it had saved the client, and by extension ISI, millions. I remember the late nights, the weekends spent debugging code, the working holidays to meet critical deadlines. My ex-wife, Sarah, used to joke that ISI was my first love. Looking back, she wasn't far off the mark. Loyalty wasn't just a word to me, it was a practice. I'd seen colleagues come and go, chasing higher salaries or loftier titles. I stayed. I believed in building something, in stability. When we weathered the 2008 recession and later the dot-com bubble's lingering aftershocks, I took a voluntary pay cut to help keep the ship afloat, as did several other senior staff. Richard had clapped me on the back then, his voice thick with false sincerity. "John, you're the bedrock of this place." Those words echoed now with a hollow, mocking tone. My life was interwoven with ISI. My professional identity, my financial security, even a significant portion of my social life, through work events and casual friendships with colleagues, were all tied to that building downtown. I wasn't just an employee, I was a fixture, a part of the institutional memory. The thought of starting over, of re-entering the job market in my early 50s, was daunting, a chilling prospect I'd never seriously entertained because I'd been so secure, so certain of my place. That certainty now lay shattered like the cheap ceramic mug I'd almost dropped when I read Richard's email. The one with the faded ISI logo. The first dissonant note in the symphony of my otherwise stable career at ISI sounded about 9 months before my unceremonious dismissal. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like a single off-key violin in a large orchestra. Richard called an impromptu meeting regarding the Next Gen initiative, a new strategic push to modernize our service offerings. I, who had historically led the charge on similar large-scale internal projects, wasn't initially on the invite list. I only found out when Maria, Richard's usually flustered executive assistant, forwarded me the minutes for my awareness. My name was conspicuously absent from the list of key stakeholders. When I casually queried Richard about it, he'd waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, John, don't you worry your head about this one. We need you focused on the Keystone account. It's too critical to divert your attention." It sounded plausible, almost like a compliment, but a small seed of doubt was planted. Then came Kevin Armstrong. He was young, barely 30, with a recent MBA and a lexicon peppered with the latest corporate buzzwords: synergy, disruption, agile transformation. Richard introduced him as a strategic hire meant to infuse fresh perspectives. Kevin was assigned to my department, ostensibly to learn the ropes under my guidance. Yet, within weeks, he was being invited to meetings I wasn't, CC'd on emails about projects that were historically mine, and tasked with drafting proposals for new client engagements, areas where I had decades of proven success. I'd try to offer guidance, share historical context, but Kevin would often nod vaguely, a polite but impenetrable smile on his face, before remarking, "Thanks, John, but I think Richard wants us to blue sky this with a totally new lens." My lens, it seemed, was becoming obsolete. The weekly project review meetings, once a collaborative forum, started feeling different. My contributions were often glossed over, while Kevin's more theoretical, less experience-grounded suggestions were met with enthusiastic nods from Richard. It was like watching a slow-motion coup, but so politely executed that to protest loudly would have made me seem paranoid or resistant to change. The most concrete sign came with the Q3 performance review cycle about 2 months before the end. My reviews had always been stellar. This time, while not negative, it was lukewarm. Vague phrases like "needs to embrace new methodologies" and "opportunity to delegate more effectively" appeared. This after I had single-handedly navigated the Keystone project through a critical vendor failure, working an 80-hour week to prevent a catastrophic collapse. It was then, after that tepid review, that the nagging unease solidified into genuine suspicion. It was then that I started creating my insurance policy, systematically archiving my work, not just the final products, but the development pathways, the decision trees, the countless iterations that led to success. If they were planning to phase me out, they wouldn't do it seamlessly on my watch. The email on that Tuesday morning was just the final, brutal confirmation of what my gut had been screaming for months. The full scope of the betrayal, however, wasn't just in the act of firing me, but in its cold, impersonal execution and the clear, calculated intent behind it. They wanted me gone, quickly and quietly, with minimal fuss. That elimination of your current role was a classic corporate euphemism for "you're too expensive and we think we can get by with someone younger and cheaper." Kevin Armstrong was clearly the chosen replacement, groomed to take over, though I doubted he possessed even a fraction of the institutional knowledge or the nuanced understanding of our key clients that I did. As the initial shock wore off, a strange calm settled over me. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My mind, trained by years of project management and crisis resolution, began to methodically dissect the situation. The first thing I did was resist the urge to call Richard and unleash a torrent of righteous anger. That would be playing into their hands, giving them ammunition to paint me as disgruntled and unprofessional. Instead, I reread the termination email carefully. It mentioned my last official day of employment would be that very same Tuesday, October 26, 2023. My severance package details would be mailed to my home address within 7 business days. My access to company systems, it stated, had already been revoked as per standard procedure. Standard procedure. For an employee of nearly 2 decades, a pillar of their operations, to be locked out like a common thief without so much as a conversation. The disrespect was galling, but it also fueled a cold resolve. I thought about the files on my encrypted drive. The Keystone project alone was a behemoth with hundreds of interconnected subprojects, custom scripts I'd written, and undocumented workarounds that only I truly understood. Then there were the half-dozen other active projects, each with its own complexities. Richard and Kevin might think they could just pick up where I left off, relying on the official documentation, which, as in most companies, was never quite as comprehensive or up-to-date as the reality. They were in for a rude awakening. My strategy began to form, not as a plan for revenge in the traditional sense, but as a means to ensure that my value, the value they had so carelessly discarded, would become undeniably, painfully apparent. I wouldn't sabotage them, that wasn't my style, and it would be illegal. But I also wouldn't lift a finger to help them out of the mess they were about to create for themselves unless it was on my terms. The first step was to secure my own position. I immediately contacted an employment lawyer, a reputable one whose details I discreetly researched a few weeks prior when the writing on the wall became too clear to ignore. I emailed him a copy of my employment contract, my recent lukewarm performance review, and the termination letter. I needed to understand my rights, the legality of their actions, especially given my tenure and consistent track record. The second step was patience. I would wait for them to realize the magnitude of their error. It wouldn't take long. The intricate web of dependencies I managed was a ticking clock. And I had the key. The call came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday afternoon, 3 days after my termination. I was at my local library, ironically researching small business startup grants, when an unknown number flashed on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a message popped up. It was Maria, Richard Davies' assistant, her voice audibly strained. "John, hi, it's Maria. Richard was hoping to have a quick chat with you. Could you please give him a call back? It's rather urgent regarding the Keystone account." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. So, the carefully constructed edifice was already showing cracks. I didn't call back immediately. I let them stew in it over the weekend. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had advised me to communicate strictly via email for record-keeping purposes, if at all, until we had a clearer picture. On Monday morning, November 1st, an email from Richard landed in my inbox. Subject: Urgent, Keystone Project, Critical Issues. The tone was a far cry from the detached corporate speak of my termination letter. This Richard sounded stressed, almost desperate. "John," it began, "hope you're doing okay. Listen, we've run into some significant snags with the Keystone rollout, specifically with the data migration module you designed. Kevin is having trouble deciphering some of the back-end scripts, and the client is concerned. There are some deliverables due Wednesday, and frankly, we're in a bit of a bind. Would you be open to a quick call to walk us through a few things?" This was my opening. I drafted a polite, professional response vetted by Mr. Henderson. "Dear Richard," I wrote, "thank you for reaching out. I received your email regarding my termination on October 26th. As I am no longer an employee of Innovate Solutions Incorporated, my access to company systems and project materials has been revoked. Regrettably, this limits my ability to provide detailed, real-time assistance on proprietary systems. However, given my extensive history with the Keystone project, I understand its critical nature. I may be available for consultation services on a contractual basis to facilitate a smooth transition and address specific technical challenges. My standard consulting rate is $350 per hour with a minimum engagement of 20 hours. Please let me know if you wish to proceed with a formal consulting agreement, and I can have my legal representative forward the standard terms." I hit send. The silence on their end was deafening for a few hours. Then another email from Richard, shorter this time. "John, your rate is significantly higher than anticipated. Can we discuss this?" My reply was equally concise. "Richard, that is my standard rate for short-term, urgent engagements requiring specialized expertise. It is non-negotiable. The terms would also include a clear scope of work to ensure efficient use of time. I am, of course, happy to allow ISI to attempt to resolve these issues internally if that is preferred." The satisfying thud of the ball landing back in their court was almost palpable. They had fired me to save money, presumably hoping Kevin, at a fraction of my salary, could fill my shoes. Now, to fix the immediate damage, they were looking at paying me more per week as a consultant than they'd paid me in a month as a loyal employee. Mr. Henderson had also been busy. He reviewed my contract and the circumstances of my dismissal. While proving age discrimination was notoriously difficult, the abruptness of the termination after 18 years of good service, coupled with the lack of any formal warnings or a performance improvement plan, gave us grounds to negotiate a significantly better severance package than the paltry one they'd likely offer. The pressure was mounting on them, not just from the Keystone Project, but, as I later learned, from several other clients who had started noticing a drop in responsiveness and expertise now that their primary point of contact was suddenly no longer with the company. My meticulously organized archive, my insurance policy, wasn't just about data, it was about operational continuity, a continuity they had arrogantly assumed they could maintain without me. They hadn't just underestimated my value, they had critically overestimated their own capabilities. The negotiations for my consulting services and an enhanced severance package were swift and, from my perspective, deeply satisfying. Richard Davies, who had signed my termination letter with such detached efficiency, now found himself approving invoices for my time at a rate that clearly pained him. The initial 20-hour engagement for the Keystone Project quickly ballooned as they discovered just how many undocumented intricacies and crucial historical details resided only with me. Kevin Armstrong, the Wunderkind MBA, struggled visibly. I made sure my consultations were professional, sticking strictly to the technical matters at hand. I didn't gloat, I didn't say, "I told you so." My calm, measured assistance was, I think, more galling to them than any outburst would have been. I would join video calls, share my screen, never giving them direct access to my archive, only showing them processed information or specific code snippets they needed, and walk Kevin or other team members through the problems. Each solved issue was a testament to my knowledge, each hour billed a reminder of their miscalculation. The client for the Keystone Project, a no-nonsense logistics company called Freight Corp, became inadvertently instrumental. Their senior vice president, a woman named Eleanor Vance, whom I'd worked with for years and had a good professional rapport with, called me directly on my personal cell about a week into this fiasco. "John," she'd said, her voice betraying her frustration, "what in blazes is going on at ISI? They can't seem to find their own backside with both hands since you left. We have a critical system update that's stalled, and this new fellow, Kevin, seems completely out of his depth." I explained my new status as an external consultant. Eleanor, a shrewd operator, understood immediately. "So they let you go, and now they're paying you a fortune to clean up their mess? Sounds about right for corporate short-sightedness." She then made it clear to Richard Davies that Freight Corp expected ISI to resolve the issues immediately, and if that meant keeping me involved as a consultant regardless of the cost, then that's what they had to do. Her pressure expedited the consulting agreement and likely contributed to their willingness to settle on a more generous severance. Mr. Henderson, my lawyer, played hardball on the severance. He highlighted my 18 years of unblemished service, the lack of due process in my termination, and the potential reputational damage to ISI if word got out about how they treated long-term, high-performing employees, especially if critical projects faltered. We didn't explicitly threaten an age discrimination lawsuit, but the implication hung in the air. Innovate Solutions Incorporated eventually agreed to a severance package equivalent to 18 months' salary, full health benefits for the same period, and a formally written letter of apology from Richard Davies himself, acknowledging my contributions to the company. The letter was a carefully worded piece of corporate prose, but the fact that they had to write it, that Richard had to sign his name to it, was a small victory in itself. The consulting gig lasted nearly 3 months. I transitioned all critical knowledge, documented everything meticulously on their dime, and ensured their team could, eventually, stand on its own. By the time my contract ended in late January 2024, ISI had paid me more in consulting fees and severance than my next 2 years' salary would have been. They had fired me to cut costs, and in doing so, incurred a far greater expense, not to mention significant internal disruption and client dissatisfaction. My revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, calculated demonstration of value delivered with professional detachment. The sweetest part was watching them pay, quite literally, for their mistake. The final invoice was paid on February 15, 2024. The subject line of the confirmation email simply read, "Final payment, J. Miller Consulting." It was a curiously understated end to a tumultuous few months. The anger I'd felt on that October morning had long since dissipated, replaced by a sense of weary vindication and, surprisingly, a profound sense of liberation. Innovate Solutions Incorporated, the company that had been the center of my professional universe for nearly 2 decades, was now firmly in my past. The letter of apology from Richard, framed not out of pride but as a reminder of lessons learned, sat on my new desk in the small home office I'd begun to set up. It acknowledged my significant contributions and dedication, hollow words perhaps, but a documented admission nonetheless. My new beginning wasn't what I might have envisioned a year prior. The idea of diving back into another corporate structure, even a more appreciative one, held little appeal. The experience with ISI had stripped away any lingering naivety about corporate loyalty. It was a transaction, pure and simple. My skills and time for their money. When the equation no longer suited them, the transaction ended. The severance package and the consulting fees provided a comfortable financial cushion, enough to allow me to breathe and think about what I truly wanted to do next. The answer, it turned out, was to build something for myself. Leveraging the reputation I'd inadvertently solidified with Freight Corp and a few other former clients who'd witnessed ISI's stumble, I started my own independent project management consultancy, Miller Strategic Solutions. It had a nice ring to it. The work was challenging, engaging, and entirely on my own terms. I chose my clients, set my hours, and reaped the full rewards of my expertise. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the very skills ISI had undervalued were now the foundation of my own thriving enterprise. Looking back, that shocking betrayal on my day off was, in a strange way, a catalyst. It forced me out of a comfortable rut I hadn't even realized I was in. The stability I thought I had at ISI was an illusion, dependent on the whims of executives and the ever-shifting sands of corporate strategy. True stability, I was learning, came from within, from my own skills, my own resilience, and my willingness to adapt. The copied files, my insurance policy, had served their purpose not as a weapon of revenge, but as a shield and a lever, allowing me to navigate a difficult transition with my dignity and finances intact. They were a testament to foresight born of unease, a quiet act of self-preservation that had paid off immeasurably. Life has a funny way of course-correcting. Sometimes the most painful endings are disguised beginnings. They fired me on my day off without notice, but in doing so, they gave me back my future, a future I was now building, one carefully planned project at a time. And that, I've found, is the most satisfying outcome of all.